Hello coaches and welcome to Give and Go Live. My name is David Newbury and I'm joined by my colleague Ian Barker. Hi Ian, how are you?
Hello David, it's all good here in Kansas City, Missouri, and looking forward to this presentation. Encouraging all of our guests to interact with us on the right hand side of their screen with our poll questions and our bar for asking questions if you have questions of myself or David, and to interact with the downloads as well. So please join us fully in the presentation.
Thanks, Ian. And this session today, we're going to look at the systems of play, looking at the 1-3-5-2 system and specifically the attacking side of the ball. And this is really popular as a way to introduce the numbering system with our players, with our young players. And Ian's going to cover that in a minute. And then we're also going to talk about how to develop the 1-3-5-2, starting with 4v4 and developing into 7v7 and 9v9. So Ian, if you could start off by talking a little bit about the numbering system, that'd be great.
Sure, thanks David. So for those of you that are familiar with the numbering system, just bear with me here for a second because I'm sure many of you are not quite sure. What we've done is we've identified the 11 positions based on number 1 being goalkeeper, 2 is our right defender, 3 is our left defender, 7 is our right-sided forward or midfielder, and so on and so forth. And so this gives players an idea of where their general positioning is based on a number. In the case of the 3-5-2 formation, and we'll talk about how that formation becomes a system at some point, because we're playing with 2 out-and-out strikers, they both have the designation 9. So consequently, we've lost a number somewhere. In the case of the 3-5-2 formation, we sacrifice a center back in favor of having 2 number 9s. So that's just a little nuance. And please feel free, like I say, to send us questions about this topic, but that's how our numbering system works.
And we do have a question from Amy for you, Ian, and she asks, does this formation match up with any others that you're familiar with?
Thanks for the question, Amy. Just very quickly, my personal preference is to choose a formation that becomes a system based on my players and my personal preference. I don't typically pick my formation on the basis of the opponent. However, if you line this up against a 4-4-2, a 4-3-3, I think you could probably find some strengths and weaknesses based in the coverage of the field at least.
Great, thanks Ian. So now let's talk about some of the features of this system. And the first feature is the ability for us to attack with 7 players. The 2 wide players, the 7 and 11, of course, the 2 strikers, and then the 2 more attack-minded midfield players, the number 8 and number 10. That is permissible because we have a very strong defensive line with the 3 central defenders and then the defensive lying number 6 midfield player. So that is the first feature of this system.
David, a question from Simon. He asked if you see any obvious weakness in the lineup. You've talked about some positives there, but is there a fundamental weakness in the 3-5-2 you identify?
Well, certainly if I was playing against a 3-5-2 as an opponent, the one place that I would be looking to really exploit as quickly as we can is the areas in behind the 2 wide players, the 11 and 7, particularly as in the situation I've just described where you would play with these players in a much more advanced attacking position. So that would be one area of weakness, but I'm not inclined to tell you any more because this is the system I play.
Fair enough. So when we look at the system and the field coverage of the players, one of the things that we see is there's good depth in the team. So you have a back line, you have deep midfielders, you have high midfielders, you have width from 7 and 11, and of course you have your strikers. So you've got a pretty good amount of field coverage, and you've got a lot of depth. And so one of the things this allows us to do, wherever we are on the field, is there's probably a longer pass which bypasses elements of the team, but there is typically always a shorter pass, be it wide or internally. And so one of the things from an attacking or a counter-attacking perspective that I think is really positive is this notion of the ability to play short or long, to play centrally or play wide in the 3-5-2 formation.
Thanks, Ian. So the third feature is the opportunity for the team to play between the opponent's lines. And what this means is the opportunity to play between the defensive line and the midfield line, and in our defensive line and midfield line. So in these spaces between our players, and the opportunity to stagger the number 6, the number 8, and number 10 allows us to cover a lot of ground and to get particularly the number 10 and the number 8 in between the defensive line of the opponent and just behind our forward line. So that is very effective. The other position, of course, to get those players in between the lines is in wide positions where we may play the ball just in advance of our 11 and 7, so they're running at the defenders.
David, quick question from Lenny. It seems like Lenny probably coaches a youth team, and he asks, where would you sub most frequently in a system or a formation like this?
Definitely the area that we sub most often, and certainly early in the game, is in the wide positions. These players in this system are expected to cover a massive amount of ground, often between the penalty box in our end and then the penalty box in the opponent's end. And so they need to be fit, but we also need to be conscious to turn these players over on a more regular basis just to keep up the intensity.
Okay, thanks. So one of the things I particularly like about the 3-5-2, and certainly if I was playing this with my youth players, I'd be emphasizing, is relationships that give us sort of different geometric shapes or patterns, if you will. So for example, the relationship between the number 10 and the twin strikers gives us a little triangle there as marked in the red. And that's a relationship that we would look to build on in training. So we'd sometimes play some 3 versus 2s or 3 versus 3s, and we put those players together. What you start to do when you work with your players is identify other geometric shapes. So the relationship between 6 and the high midfielder number 10, or possibly the wide player. And then how does that then tie in with maybe this number 9, or possibly this number 9, or possibly into the number 10. And so one of the joys of coaching when you get players that are old enough to understand formations and systems is this exploration of different shapes and patterns that you can establish.
Very good, Ian. And we've got a couple of questions that have just come in from Nikki and Hillary. We'll get to those in just a minute when we go to the summary slide. For the last point, though, relating to the features of this from an attacking perspective, is the relationship between the 2 number 9s. And I like to condition my number 9s to stay within the perimeter of the or the width of the penalty box. I'd like to see the strikers work within about a 10 to 15 yard radius of each other, and also to move laterally no wider than the edge of the penalty box, because I want to keep the wide positions available for my 11 and also my number 7 attacking into those wide positions.
So just one of the features of this formation in terms of system, I'm fortunate enough to watch a lot of Sporting Kansas City here in MLS, and we see the 3-5-2 come in from other teams. So one of the features is, of course, you could switch the point of attack through the midfield, be it 11 all the way to 7 or 11 to 10 and then 10 out to 7. Those are all viable. But what I've started to see a lot recently is switching from one side of the field through the other using depth. So that might be 11 to 3 across and then out to 7. That's one option. Another option is to go straight from a wide position back to our goalkeeper, who then connects to 2 and to 7. And if you've got very proficient technical goalkeepers, you can actually go all the way back and then directly to your wide midfielders, skipping out your defenders. And if you're looking for references of people that can do this, certainly Spanish goalkeepers are particularly adept with their feet and also throwing. But one of the nice features of this formation is identifying how you want to switch the point of attack. And it seems very in fashion right now to go around the back to do it, as opposed to through the midfield.
Thanks, Ian. So let's talk a little bit about how we build up this formation now through the small-sided games format. And the first format, of course, is the 4v4, the format that is used now in the United States, mandated by US Soccer for children in the 8 and under age group. And going back to the original formation and the 11v11 formation, we have maintained the number 4, our central defender. We are playing with the number 7 and a number 11, our 2 wide players, and bringing in early on the process the number 9. And that's really critical because we're trying to teach the number 9, the striker, to play both facing the goal and playing with their back to goal, which is certainly an early technique that these young players need to learn. So the reasons why we do that and this formation is it provides us with the width that we are looking for early on in the process and provides length in terms of height and also in terms of depth. Ian, to you.
Good. So thanks, David. Now, what I'm looking at here is 7 players, and what we've added is a goalkeeper. We've added 2 central midfielders to thicken the squad, and we still have the original 4, the diamond, if you will, that David had previously shown us. So this would be if you're coaching 10 and unders and you're building towards playing 3-5-2 in your 11v11, or possibly you're coaching 11v11 already, but you have 14, 15 kids at training. So if 3-5-2 was my finishing 11-a-side system, I like this because I've started to give myself the numerical advantage in the center of midfield. I've exposed my wide players to a lot of running, which is what they're going to have to do in a 3-5-2. And I've begun to bring in the depth and the length on the team. So that's kind of how I would start building towards 3-5-2 in a 7.
And finally, the 9v9 format and the additional players here, the additional 2 players from the 7v7 are the number 2 and the number 3. So the left and right central defenders. Now, what's really critical here is the ability for us to build from the back. So by bringing these 2 players in, we now have an opportunity from our goalkeeper to distribute the ball to the left and to the right side to help build up our attacks down the width of the field through our number 2 and our number 3 to our 7 and to our 11. So that's one of the big features and one of the topics that I would be exploring with the 12 and under age group as we build into the 9v9s.
So by way of conclusion, this is kind of a slide that we've seen before, but here is our 3-5-2. You can see we've aligned our 3 relatively flat. We've created an important player here in number 6, the sort of screening holding central midfielder. Very often our number 10 is very creative, and our number 8 might be the guy or the girl in the midfield that does a lot of work. That's one interpretation of the formation as it becomes a system. A lot of running on the part of 7 and 11 back and forth in the wide space, and then the twin strikers as our partnership. So again, this is the formation. How it becomes a system is based on your preferences of attacking modalities and defending modalities. The formation suggests where the players are on the field, and then it becomes a system as we, the coach, adds in our flavor.
Ian, while we're on this slide, if I could ask you those 2 questions. Thanks for your patience, Nikki and Hillary. Firstly, Nikki's question, do we play with a sweeper in a back 3?
That's a great question. So the idea there, I think, is Nikki, right? So this player would be man marking, this player would be man marking, and then this player would be a free roaming sweeper. In youth soccer, you can be very successful with that. However, the challenge becomes the 2 man markers have very specific tasks and don't learn to play off the ball very much. And the sweeper very seldom learns to engage in a 1v1 combative situation. So what is much more common in the modern game, the senior game, and what is considered to be developmentally appropriate is that we actually ask these three players to play within their zones, if you will, within their spaces, and know how to mark players and know how to mark space at the same time.
Great. And Hillary's question relates back to these two number 9s. Can you just explain why they're both number 9s again?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Hillary. So very often we see the system 4-3-3. So number 11 would be a forward, number 7 would be a forward, and there would be a solo number 9. That's very common. In fact, in the modern game at the senior level, very often the number 9 is left to his or her own devices. In the 3-5-2, you get the opportunity to train a very important relationship between two strikers. And these could be, these are both identified as goal scorers, and they could be complementary. You could have one that's 6 foot tall and one who's 5 foot, one's quick, one's strong, or they could be have very comparable skills. But the idea here is that you create this relationship between these two strikers, and you know, if you travel with your team, they're probably roommates because they need to be on the same page.
Well, thanks very much, Ian. And just a reminder, if you are watching this as a YouTube replay, you will not be able to get the interactive elements and the hand